Motiram, wherein various guidelines have been let down by the Supreme Court. But still, ultimately, what is the objective of bail? Can you give your reflections on it?
Thank you, Chirag, and thanks for inviting me for this program. We have to remember that almost more than 4 decades ago, Justice V. Krishna Iyer, he made the statement and he said, bail or jail at the pre-trial or post-conviction stage belongs to the bullard area of criminal justice system and largely brings on the hunch of the bench, otherwise called judicial discretion. Now, like from the beginning, this issue of the bail is that court exercise judicial discretion. Now, when they exercise discretion, what are the parameters on which this discretion should go, either in favor of bail or not granting bail? So, to bail or not to bail. Now, one of the interesting things happened recently when this case of happened where this Abhishek Manu Singhvi, he argued the former finance minister who was in uh, jail and Chidambaram versus Act of Enforcement. And there, interestingly, in the case is argued that there, in these kinds of cases, there's a 3 tests which need to be followed. So the question is, what are those 3 tests which they have pondering upon? And he has written, Manu Singhvi has also written subsequently that the test on which the bill should be granted. Those 3 tests we will look into quick later, but later we understand why this entire concept of bail comes into picture. Now, this when the accused persons are arrested during the investigation, the purpose of investigation is collection of evidence. Now, when we see the collection of evidences, there might be occasion that without arresting someone, you may get more evidences. There might be occasion with arrest, you may secure more evidences. So, during investigation is one circumstances, post completion of investigation, the trial comes, and we have to ultimately, we have to look into from the point of view that if you are releasing some accused persons from the custody, what kinds of impact it will have. So what the Manu Singhvi argument was in Chidambaram case was, and he subsequently he's written extensively in a few series of articles on his personal experiences and practitioner, and he said there is a need for a serious review of law related to bail or anticipatory bail. The test for both should, bearing a few exceptions, be uniform triple test. Wise denial only upon demonstrable showing flight risk. So that means the person will not run away in that extreme. Non-cooperations, tampering with the evidences. Now, is this test is valid considerations? In fact, though in the case Chidambaram versus Act of Enforcement, Supreme Court has enlarged on bail, but Supreme Court did not agree with this, and Supreme Court itself in that case says that gravity of the offences play very important role. So, and court considering this gravity of the offences, court says that it's not only these 3 things, there are something more, and so gravity play one kinds of role. Remember long ago in Prahlad Singh case, the guidelines which the Supreme Court has says that the considerations, and it's laid down the 5 major considerations. First, the nature of accusation, severity of punishment, so it's all talk about the gravity. Apprehension, reasonable apprehension basically for tampering with the evidence. Reasonable apprehension of securing the presence of the accused. If there's apprehension that he will run away, he can abscond, etc. So these flight issues. Character, behavior, standing of the accused in circumstances which are peculiar to the accused. Now we find series of cases where the court has categorically says in the matter of bail, it has to be judged on the basis of a particular case. We cannot have any specific, this is the hard and fast rule on the parameters on which only you can decide. These are the only guidelines. And the larger public interest. Remember, we see there are many cases when court has discussed where they talk about is not the point of view of the accused, but also what the impact will be there on the victim, impact on the whole society. And those also are larger consideration which also keep it in mind. But then again, bail should or custody should not be, this a trial stage, it should not become an alternative to punishment. So we that again the larger question which we have to see while discussing the issue of bail. So late in while discussing, we can put forward some other views also. But in my views, we have to understand, is the keeping the persons in custody serve any purposes? Because still we have a presumption of innocence, and that's the human rights protections which we cannot jeopardize, we cannot compromise unless you have some great evidence. Even Chidambaram cases in Delhi High Court, they produce some papers in a sealed cover. Now this entire habit of bringing something before the court in the sealed cover, Supreme Court said that okay, it's unfair to see the sealed cover, but there's, as because the High Court has look into that sealed cover, will also look into it, and they ultimately come to different conclusions after going through this also. So it's a judicial discretion, and the judicial discretion must be exercised wisely. Yeah, that's basic my view on this. Yeah.
Thank you so much, sir, for sharing your views. And while we understand that an argument was made vehemently in P. Chidambaram versus Directorate of Enforcement that a triple test should be applied, which involves flight risk, non-cooperation with the investigating agencies, and tampering with evidence. Ultimately, court came to the conclusion that gravity of offense is one of the most important factor. On the point of sealed cover, again, when an accused is produced before the court for the first time after detention, accused does not have access to remand papers, accused does not have access to FIR papers. So generally also, even in regular bail applications, what are the allegations, precise allegation against the accused, and what is the case of investigating agency at that time remains unknown to the accused. So in this background, I would like to ask you, Professor Bedi, what are your views? What do you think should be the prime consideration while granting or denying bail?
Thank you so much, Mr. Chirag Balian, for inviting me, first of all, to this platform where we are having such an important discussion. And my greetings to everyone who is present here, Professor Anil, Professor Sarfaraz, and the entire team. I think I missed out a little bit of Professor Sarfaraz's point of view because there was some connection issue. But thankfully, I have joined back again. Well, as you probably said and discussed, that the bail jurisprudence remains blurred, and there is no sort of clear-cut vision which the judiciary seems to be following. Now, sometimes we say that it is the triple test which must govern all the cases, which you include the flight risk, the non-cooperation, and the tampering of evidence or witnesses, which is a part of it. And in some cases, we gives more significance to the gravity of the offense test. Now, in my view, I would just like to say this, that the triple test must govern most of the cases, despite the constant chant of the prosecution for invoking the so-called gravity of the offense test. Of course, there would be exceptions. The derogation from the triple test should be allowed only in the rare categories like, you know, terrorism, child molestation, serial killings, etc. But if I think there is some kind of consistency that we desire, it should come through following the triple test. And, you know, even in the triple test, if you look at the flight risk nowadays hardly arises, because, you know, once you've surrendered the passport, there is very less chance of, you know, somebody really running away from you, absconding. Non-cooperation must be really restricted to non-appearance or when the accused is summoned, only particularly to that. And tampering, when we talk of tampering of evidence or witness, it must be real, it must be practical, and it must be something which is a likely probability rather than some vague allegations by the prosecution. So this is my point of view on this particular issue. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Shruti. So, just a follow-up question: when you talk about gravity of offense, we have yesterday this case of encounter of Mr. Vikas Dubey, and he was enlarged on bail. Now, as per media reports, there were 66 FIRs against them, and there is a general consensus that most of the offenses were heinous. So, in your view, definitely there was a gravity of offense. So, in your view, do you think it was just for the magistrate to release him on the bail, or should his case be still governed by the three-pronged test?
See, again, these are the cases which come into the exceptional categories, the rare categories, where, of course, gravity of offense is a very, very important factor to be taken into account and into consideration. And here again, the point of view would be that if we particularly, we not talking of a particular case. Yes, yesterday's case is a very significant, prominent sort of a case which is highlighted. But when we talk of the general routine jurisprudence in matters concerning bail, where the gravity of offense test is applied, and apart from a few listed exceptions that I've mentioned before, it must necessarily be measured by the length of the punishment which is decided by the legislature. So let not the courts, neither the prosecution, the state, the complainant, the accused, or the society, be the deciding factors to determine the gravity. The gravity should be determined as per the length of the punishment which has already been pre-decided by the legislature in its wisdom. Because you see that for some people, rape is a very heinous offense. For some others, it may not be so. Murder is more of heinous. Maybe white collar crimes. In China, you have a death penalty for white collar crimes. So it depends on the perception of the society, of the people, which keeps changing. So if we have to have some consistency, let it be the wisdom which has already been exercised by the legislature to decide what is the gravity, which is decided by the length of the punishment, which is measured through that means. And really, bail is a matter of discretion ultimately in non-bailable offenses, and it cannot be claimed as a matter of right, and judicial discretion has to be somewhere controlled, and that is done through the application of our constitutional principles under Article 20, 21, and the whole gamut of the individual liberty being given importance. Of course, the security of the state, that is the perpetual debate that we talk of, but these are the paramount considerations that have to be kept in mind to maintain and bring that equilibrium between the constitutional rights of the accused and ensuring the punishment to the offender through a fair trial.
Thank you. Thank you so much for your views. But I feel that when we talk about gravity of offense and we start measuring it, how legislature has decided, so we have various offenses where even for petty offenses, what we consider petty from our perception has a very higher punishment. And we have host of strict liability offenses also. Another concern which emerges with the gravity of the offense is at the stage of bail application, it is single-handedly in the hand of the informant, what allegation informant want to put. And after Lalita Kumari especially, the police does not have any option of doing preliminary inquiry. FIR is to be registered. And if the punishment is more than 7 years, definitely arrest has to be made. And if we go by this standard of gravity, definitely bail is going to be denied in almost all cases. So considering this background, my question is to Professor Anil Variath. Sir, what is your views about gravity being the factor?
The gravity of offense, of course, it is a factor to be considered at the time of giving bail, but that shall not be the sole bail jurisprudence, as far as India is concerned, was crystal clear till the 80s. And the bail was the rule and jail was the exception. And the legislature wisdom was to give discretion to the judges at the trial court or at the magistrate level, who used it very effectively and viciously. But after 80s, or we can say the post-emergency period, the shift in the approach of judiciary. And that may be because of the high-profile cases involving, new generation laws or strict liability laws just now mentioned. So that has changed the entire approach of judiciary toward the bail jurisprudence. For example, gravity of offense, who decides the gravity of offense? It is for the judiciary to decide whether the case is grave or not. For example, nowadays there is a practice on the part of the police to invoke UAPA in every case. Whenever UAPA is invoked, the High Court says there is no bail at all. And I am of another view that, see, I may be out of place in telling, but still I tell you, the higher courts, including the apex court, have ruined the system of bail. Because the judges who sit in the apex court and high court has never appeared in a trial court. They do not know the psychology and they do not know the intricacies of accused being produced in a magistrate court. How many judges of high court or Supreme Court has filed an application for bail in the magistrate court? How many of them have conducted even a 323 trial case? No. Then they come and sit on the apex level and speak on theoretical aspects of the criminal bail jurisprudence. That is to be changed. See, you should have a practical approach. So, in my view, there cannot be a single parameter. There can be a lot of variables which has to be applied from case to case basis by the judiciary in a judicious manner, and gravity of offense is only one of that parameters and not the sole criteria. And if one more bit I'll tell you, the traditionally the approach was that when the remand of a accused is demanded, it was on 3 grounds. First is to facilitate an interfereless investigation. Second one is to prevent the accused from interfering with or tampering with the evidence or influence the witness during the investigation process. And third one was to generate confidence among the public. This was a traditional view. And this has been changed drastically by the time we stand here on 2020. So what I feel is there must be a holistic approach. There shall not be any one single criteria. That's all.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your views. And now I'll get back to Professor Sarfaraz. Sir, in this background, what do you think should be the grounds for cancellation of bail? Because when we talk about granting of bail, it's mainly from the accused perspective, but there is also a state's perspective. And especially when the charge sheet has already been filed.
Chirag, for cancellation of bail, in my view, again, the similar circumstances which come from other side. We have few important examples. Like long ago, Sanjay Gandhi case which was happened, and the issue was the cancellation of bail. And one of the grounds which the court has extensively discussed in that circumstances was how much there is an apprehension that if the accused person is outside, it will affect the trial. So if it is at the trial stage, if it is at the investigation stage, how it is going to affect the investigation. So there must be some tangible evidence which shows that this is the case one where the accused does not that point of time deserve to get bail, considering those all, whether it's a pre-test, gravity and other circumstances. If they have given the bail that point of time, yes, and there's an apprehension subsequent thereto that it may either affect the trial because, again, those circumstances, accused may run away, tampering with the evidences, threatening the witnesses, which happened in the Sanjay Gandhi case. The bail can be cancelled. This is another important, but again we see that the court is not that having the same kinds of deal in cancellation of bail. For instance, if you see the example of there's a case called Gudia, versus state, where Gudia and NGO who file a case before the Supreme Court for cancellation of bail for traffickers. And if we read the judgment from the beginning till end, court had extensively discussed that okay, these are the worst kinds of offences, trafficking, heinous offences, and there's a tangible evidence is available. But as because at the end, so when you see before this last paragraph, impression is that the court is going to cancel the bail. But when we read the SBC judgment, an excellent judge of the Supreme Court, and then we read the last paragraph, Supreme Court says no, once the liberty has been granted, and now it's granted long ago. So there's a gap between the time when liberty has been granted and cancellation applications reached to Supreme Court. It's unfair to cancel the bail. So for cancellation of the bail, we require much more stronger evidences that look the time when he was granted bail and from now what are the impact if they are enlarged, if they are outside. Is it really going to impact the investigation? It is going to impact the trial. If the answer is yes, then yes, bail can be cancelled by the court. And we have a provision like in CRPC 439 clause 2 can be used. For the magistrate 437 clause 5 can be used. Those powers are given to the court to cancel the bail, and the Superior Court can definitely exercise their constitutional power to cancel the bail.
Thank you so much, sir. So definitely, as far as cancellation of bail is concerned, we need to be very circumspect, and this discretion should be exercised only in limited number of cases. So now, Professor Warrier earlier talked about gravity of offense not being the alone factor, and he talked about multiple factors, and he also said it has to be decided on case-to-case basis. And one of the instances of this case-to-case basis which has come up recently is Safura Zargar case, where the court has ventured into a new jurisprudence by saying we will grant the bail on ground of humanitarian grounds. So my question is to Professor Bedi. What are your views about humanitarian ground as a consideration to grant bail?
Thank you, Dr. Chirag. I would like to start here by what the Supreme Court and our legislative debates have repeatedly put forth before us, and particularly citing Sanjay Chandra's judgment of 2012, where the Supreme Court particularly stated that the object of bail is to secure the appearance of the accused. It is neither the object is neither to punish nor is it preventative, and deprivation of liberty must be considered to be a punishment. Now, given this background, if you look at the entire picture in this background, whether it is the question of a humanitarian ground for the grant of bail or any other ground, it is very important that first and foremost we must realize that right to liberty is a fundamental right. Now, this is add to this the humanitarian needs, and which is accepted by the society at a level where everyone has a sort of an empathy with the person who is undergoing certain kind of problems. Now, humanitarian grounds could be some kind of an illness, old age, or you have a wedding, your own or somebody else so close, or it may be the last rites of a near and dear one, or in this Safura Zargar matter, which is the case of pregnancy. Now, these are reasons, of course, which are in addition to the basic concept of personal liberty being a fundamental right. So if we keep that picture in mind, I think humanitarian grounds come at a second level. We must first clarify our bail jurisprudence. We must bring consistency to that. And of course, humanitarian grounds, come into the picture when again you've had the person inside the jail for a large period of time. He's been incarcerated for a long period of unjustified time due to the delay in the trial process, etc., which is not required. So particularly if you look at the Safura Zargar case, where she was 5 months pregnant and she has been granted bail finally by the Delhi High Court after having been refused bail because she was pregnant even then. That time, they did not look at the humanitarian grounds. The lower courts did not seem to think that that is significant. It is the time of coronavirus. She is inside the prison in such a state. So those were not considerations for the court at that point of time, but it was highlighted by the Delhi High Court. So I think it is more of a political move, you know, how to go about things, and when and to whom to grant bail, looking at the situation rather than really focusing on the moot point, which is the preservation of personal liberty. Here, I would also like to talk a little bit, since you brought up the Safura Zargar matter. You know, in the lower courts, the accusation, the charges are against Safura Zargar are under UAPA. But, and therefore, the bail provision of Section 43D(5) of the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act becomes applicable. Now, there is no mention by the lower courts or by the Delhi High Court as to how this bail provision has been made applicable in this particular case, because she is accused of blocking the roads and for participating in the anti-CAA riots. Now, how are you categorizing this in a particular specific category of terrorist offenses, or you know, justifying it as being covered under Section 43D(5)? None of the courts have been able to do that. So, and again, there is a tendency for courts that when they feel that they should grant bail, you can take up any excuse. So humanitarian ground is the way out in such matters.
Thank you, Professor Bedi, for your lucid comments. I'll again get back to Professor Variath. And Professor Bedi said that judicial discretion is exercised on the whims of the judges. In the same facts, one judge grants the bail, in the same facts, other judge denies the bail. So, sir, do you think we need some kind of legislative guidance rather than case-to-case basis approach?
I fully support the views expressed by Professor Bedi. But of course, you know, though it is a case-to-case approach is with respect to granting of bail, but with respect to these points which you have mentioned, there can be certain extent of a certain amount of legislative interference, because in the recent past, when the coronavirus case came, the Supreme Court took a view that urgent matters to be taken, and Supreme Court of the view was that bail is an urgent matter. But the Bombay High Court took that bail is not an urgent matter. So, see, there are conflicting views. Many high courts felt that bail is an urgent matter, and many other high courts felt that bail is not an urgent matter. So, this substantiates the point that these things, bail and etc., are decided by the individual whims and fancies of judges, and it tells upon the social exposure of judges. That is very important, because judges are losing the social exposure. That is why this dilemma comes, whether bail is important or not. See, in a system where we respect personal liberty so much, how can a court say that bail is not an independent matter? So there must be a certain amount of legislative interference.
Thank you, sir. When you say that Bombay High Court say bail is not an urgent matter, and then we have case of Arnab Goswami, the Supreme Court recently justified because the matter concerned liberty of an individual. That's why matter has been listed urgently. So definitely there's a disparity of thought. And now I'll come to a different perspective. Till now, we were talking from the perspective of individual liberty. Now let's also see it from the perspective of the prisons. Because ultimately it is said that prisons are meant for convicted and not under trial prisoners. But even despite that, we have 67% of under trial population. So my question to you, my question is to Professor Sarfaraz. Sir, how do you see this entire scenario?
Okay, thank you, Chirag. Now, let me, before replying to your question on this, one or two words which I wanted to say on the humanitarian ground. In the bail jurisprudence, humanitarian ground was all along, it was a part of the system, because when we see 437, the last part of it says that old age, infirms, women, children, all those things are, medical grounds are there, children's, women, So these are the grounds when 437 says that that can be a consideration for the magistrate, where otherwise they are not entitled to give bail. They can give bail on these grounds, which shows that the humanitarian ground is always in forefront. And they rightly, our colleague has said that it has to be taken into consideration. It's one of the grounds. Now let me come to these under trial prisoners issues. Just recently, I was reading an article by one professor from McGill University, Mary Manicki, and the title of article is very interesting, and it says "Punishing while presuming innocence: A study of bail conditions and administration of justice." Is basically talking about the Canada. Now, the situation is same here in India too. While we are presuming someone innocent, and we are considering that keeping during this either investigation period or during trial period in jail at least gives some satisfaction, because we are fed up with the criminal systems. We know that 93, 94% cases or 90% cases ultimately accused will get acquittals. The accused is no way is going to give punishment. Let they be in the jail for some period of time. And this kind of some kinds of why the people feel happy when they are arrested by the police. Because there are many occasions when arrest in fact damage investigation, because there are many accused whose evidences can be collected, more evidence can be collected by without arresting. It gives some satisfaction in the eyes of the local people or otherwise that okay, at least something has done. If he's in jail, some satisfaction they give that okay, we are keeping them this period of time, whether we are not sure whether they will be convicted or not. So it's again, it gives the reflection of our criminal justice system, which is really at the verge of collapse or collapse, whatever you say. So this large number of under trial prisoners in jail for longer period of time. We have a series of cases. It still shows that somewhere there is a wrong in the system. Keeping someone in the jail without unjustifiable reasons, without the reasons that they are keeping in custody will impact the trial, or they're giving them liberty will impact the trial, or giving the liberty will impact the investigation. That could be a consideration because it's going to impact the cases. Otherwise, in all other cases, the accused should be enlarged on bail because they're all creating, we have a presumption of innocence. Now, presumption of innocence is the human rights of all the individual persons. Cannot simply, you can keep someone without kinds of reasons, and that should be tangible reasons with having some sufficient background materials available. Now, in our early days of practice, when I was practicing in a magistrate court just after passing the law, whenever we have to call the police stations, in my experience, I never call the police and saying what offense he has committed. As a lawyer, I used to that point of time ask what section you have given. You will find many circumstances. Just before yesterday, 2-3 days back, all these CA, anti-CA riot cases or other situations where someone was in custody for some period of time, later on UAPA is being added just to ensure that they are not going to get bail. So whether this really is justifiable UAPA or not. So we really have to think of what should be the future of criminal justice systems where not giving them bail or keeping them in the custody, give some smaller satisfaction because we are ultimately failing in giving them punishment, cannot be a ground. We must have a develop a system where those who are really accused must be punished, and the bail accused person should not be in the jail in that large number unless there is a reasonable ground, reasonable evidences that enlargement of them will ultimately going to either impact the trial or impact the investigation, or maybe in extreme serious cases where there is a larger in public interest, where there may be effect on the life of others. So that could be a reason for not granting the bail, but there is no justification for keeping unnecessarily. And then some of the studies say those who are in jail, they are not from the affluent family or background, they are all from the different groups, the different backgrounds. So you are creating a different class. So a majority of them might be the exception, but majority of Mr. Subroto from Sahara might be in jail for a longer period of time. But when we see the majority in Tihar jail, they're all poor people. So the system does not work differently for the different class of the peoples. And that's the reason that we are overcrowded prisoners. Even this 436 clause 2, which has been added, or some other circumstances added, where they can be enlarged on bail, but it's a legal aid functions of the different law schools give the different perspective. They give the clear picture that the law is not the way it's supposed to be enforced is not enforced at the grassroots level. If we implement these, the number of the under trial prisoners will definitely is going to decrease.
Definitely, sir. Thank you for your comment. And one of the trial judges once told me that the real justice happens when an accused is sent to imprisonment at the under trial stage, because they also know ultimately person is going to get acquitted. So with this, you reflected upon what are the causes, and definitely starting from 1980 when Justice Krishna Iyer started this movement for social justice, poverty was identified as one of the reason, and even in the recent Law Commission 268th report, it is said that we should done away with the monetary bonds, etc. But apart from that, my question is to Professor Bedi. What do you think can be fixed in bail laws to reduce under trial population?
Thank you, Chirag. I think Professor Sarfaraz has really summed up the entire picture extremely well. Because filling up the jails with under trials, this thing not only ignores the fundamental presumption of innocence till the guilt is established of that accused after a proper trial, but it also violates the liberty jurisprudence under Article 20 and 21. So, given Professor Sarfaraz already spoke about this, the length of the delays in the Indian court system, the under trial incarceration, especially for the indigent, the poor, and the illiterate and the disempowered, for keeping them inside the jail when we are not able to give them a timely trial is barbaric to my mind. It is an extremely cruel and unjust punishment. If you look at the statistics, we find that it's not that the length of time that they've already spent inside the jail may not surpass the maximum or the entire period of punishment if which is given to them if they are convicted. But I think about more than 90% have already done at least half of that total period of punishment. So, and it's a very strange thing, because you cannot unwind the clock, because you have done that. You cannot give back the life of that person. You cannot give him back his family, the time which you have taken from him. It is a cruel act. And I am reminded of the 1994 matter Supreme Court, when in an NDPS matter, the Supreme Court also discussed the matter under TADA, and this was brought to light that it's been so long that people have been waiting for the trial, which is not over. They spent so much of the time inside jail. What is the remedy? So the court, I mean, this is the question which was put before the court. What is the remedy? It was again put before the court in 96 in the Shaheen welfare case, and the court came up with a one-time remedy, which is to allow the release of this under trial population, particularly for that period. So on the basis of certain conditions, categorizing the offenses in different categories, you give grant bail to them, but it's a one-time measure. It is not something which looks at the entire picture, which is going on and on. In fact, here I would actually like to give a suggestion which Chirag has already given in one of his articles for our book on bail jurisprudence, which is section 12 of the Juvenile Justice Act. So that is another thing which can be taken into account, which is a brilliant suggestion again to my mind, that the legislature should look at these kind of proposals and suggestions which are given, rather than ignore the practical realities of the situation. The Supreme Court again here, or the various high courts, ordered the release of under trials during this time of COVID lockdown to ensure the safety and the hygienic and the health conditions. But that is not something which is consistent, which calls for consistency. You have to have a consistent approach. These one-time measures are not a solution to this problem of the under trial population inside the jail suffering for so long, which has an unequal impact on their lives, as already discussed by Professor Sarfaraz.
Thank you, ma'am. So we also have a slew of judgments by social justice bench constituted by Justice H.L. Dattu in his own times, wherein Justice Madan Lokur along with Justice Sikri have passed number of judgments wherein various guidelines have been laid down to decongest the prisons. And definitely, as Professor Bedi rightly pointed out, Section 12 of Juvenile Justice Act may be a way forward, because as far as presumption of innocence is concerned, it is not recognized in general criminal jurisprudence. It is recognized in Juvenile Justice Act. As far as judiciary is concerned, there are 95% judgment which say presumption of innocence does not apply at the bail stage. It applies only at the trial stage. And that is why provisions like Section 12, Professor Sarfaraz would also agree, because he gave me that suggestion some time back in one of our conversations, that Section 12 is the way forward. But Professor Shruti earlier said that she quoted Sunil Chandra, Sanjay Chandra judgment, and said that the detention after bail is punitive, right? But most of the judgments does not recognize this fact. Most of the judgments say it is not punitive. My question is to Anil sir. In essence, when a person is in custody, there is a deprivation of liberty, there is stigma, disqualification attached. So what is more, isn't this pre-trial detention equivalent to punishment? What are your views, sir?
Though theoretically speaking, we may say that it is not punishment, but practically it is punishment. See, that is why even courts set aside the period already spent in jail during the remand period. That is set aside against the punishments. So that itself shows that it is a punishment. And moreover, see, nobody shall be kept in custody beyond even a second, beyond what is required. See, I shall tell you, when you come to Bombay, it's a very technical situation is here. In the it may be because I think a lot of awareness is to be done with respect to the judges and magistrates. See, if a person is produced before a magistrate in Mumbai in a non-bailable offense, they ask, what do you want, judicial custody or police custody? So the lawyer has to argue either for judicial custody or police custody. They don't consider bail at all at the first instance. See what an ignorance it is. And even lawyers also do the same thing. So, court must understand, even under trial or remand also, it casts a lot of stigma on the person. It affects his personal liberty. Sometimes people may lose job because of that. So many issues are there. So if that person's detention is not absolutely warranted for the purpose of investigation, then no further remand is required. That must be the rule. See, again, of course, we can think in terms of personal liberty. Even otherwise, from the procedure point of view also, there's a provision for default bail under 167, which speaks that if investigation is not completed, he has to be enlarged in bail. So that means the system, the law is absolutely in favor of bail, not in favor of bail. But what the complication has come because of the higher court's judgments. That is that is my strong opinion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. In fact, Professor Ashwath, one of the great criminal law scholars, has in number of treatises argues that even pre-trial detention is in the form of is punitive nature of punishment. I would again like to get back to Professor Sarfaraz and would like to get his views on these issues.
Okay, Chirag, I said in my earlier statement also that definitely it's legally speaking, it's not a punishment when someone is kept in the custody, because the whole idea is that we are not releasing them, because they are releasing them will adversely impact either investigation or trial. Now, it must have a cogent reasons, must have definitely some kinds of evidence. But in practice, as I said, that we live in a society, in a system where a majority of the cases ended into acquittals. And so what in the background mind, which everyone has, that okay, at least some satisfaction the person is there for some point of time. This should not be. It shows that some kinds of a bankruptcy in the system. We don't, the system does not work properly. Uh, there are many occasions the attempt has been made just to streamline the criminal justice system, and we see there is so much diverse view. Like just I wanted to share in 1 or 2 minutes the example of say it's all correlated with the right to speedy trial. We have seen the cases earlier. A.R. Antule case, 5 days bench. The issue comes about the right to speedy trial. This is a fundamental right. Issue comes, can we fix the time limit? Court says no, we cannot fix the time limit. Then becomes some other case says where the court has discussed about it. So 5 days bench decision was there in ultimately in the A.R. Antule case. Thereafter, suddenly the cases come of this Bihar case where the court has fixed the time. I just escaped from my mind the judgments, and there are 2 cases which subsequently again revision application was filed, and they fixed the time limit. And fix the time limit that okay, within this 2 years period, 3 years period, trial need to be completed. When we see the from point of view of the speedy trial, is excellent decision. Then come P. Ramachandra Rao and P. Ramachandra division bench decision, and P. Ramachandra says that look, 5 judges bench in A.R. Antule case not there to fix the time limit. How can you 2 judges in that particular case fix the time limit? And the court has set aside the cases. So there is a strong link. The link is between the whether the trial will be conducted on time. Unnecessarily, we should not keep the accused persons behind the bar for a longer period of time, because many cases which ultimately resulted into acquittal. Now, till the time we don't have a system where we can properly provide reparations to the accused who was falsely implicated or who was in the jail and ultimately ended in acquittal, I'll be happy, okay, you can keep in custody. If suppose if someone is acquitted tomorrow, fix accountability on the police, on the other personnel, as well as provide them adequate reparations for the time which they have lost in the custody. Till the time we don't have an accountability system, we want to keep them in custody, but at the same time, because of their falsification, because of their wrong intention, or might be correct cases, but the wrong evidence has not been collected properly, a person was there in jail for a longer period of time. So we must have a parallel system where accountability need to fix after acquittal, and the persons who was unnecessarily in the custody must be adequately provide reparation. If that is put in place, then only criminal justice system may say, okay, we can keep them in custody because we are going in trial. And inter alia, it will have an impact. They will be apprehensive in keeping them in custody because the longer period they will be in custody unnecessarily. And if they resulted in the acquittal, the state is responsible because the state system has failed. And the state cannot absorb with the due diligence principles because their system's failure, the person was there in custody for longer time. So it must be adequate compensation or reparation has to be provided with. But definitely the prison system is really is not what we expect in ideal criminal justice systems in India or any country in the world.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your views. Now, I come to last question, and Professor Sarfaraz has in fact addressed it to some extent by already proposing accountability as one of the methods or one of the reforms which can be introduced in the criminal justice system. But still, my question is to all the panelists, 2 reforms which you would like to see in bail laws, and probably we can start from Professor Shruti.
Thank you, Chirag. The thing is that most of the criminal laws in India are the relics of our colonial legacy. And there has been no kind of reform which has been carried out at all. In fact, the government has paid attention to all other areas except, I think, these kind of laws. The 21st report of the 21st Law Commission with its 268th report did talk of touch these issues, but I think it never came to fruition that how are these reforms going to take place. So first and foremost, I think the entire discussion has been regarding bringing consistency in the bail jurisprudence, and that can only be done through either. See, we have left a lot of our uh, we have sort of given up and left everything to the judges. It is their discretion which decides where really the bail should be granted or it should not be granted. Now, keeping in mind the human rights perspective and the fundamental rights perspective of Article 21, we should have a proper format of bail being granted as a rule in certain kinds of matters, the awareness which needs to be created even in the police, because that is the first line which is brought up before us. The police are the people who are to protect our personal liberty, but in the process we forget that. So raising the awareness of the police, the courts, the judges, that the the accused is not a criminal, he is not going to run away. There is very less apprehension, especially if he is a poor, indigent, disempowered person. What is the really the effect that he can have on the entire case? So lay down some ground rules which were already discussed in the 268 report of the Law Commission, and we need to follow it. We need to implement it. We keep bringing out practices. The suggestions, the reformatory measures have already been suggested, but it has to be implemented. I think that is the most important thing, because we already have these issues highlighted. The problems have been discussed. There is a need, however, to bring it into the stage of implementation and establish judicial jurisprudence through precedents, laying down clearly that this is the law and this is how it should be followed. So all that the professors have already discussed, Professor Anil, Professor Sarfaraz, it should actually become a part of the established judicial precedents. And it is a matter of huge satisfaction that this vital area of liberty and freedom is finally receiving some attention from people like you, and the focus, because the focus is so richly deserved. But we have many miles to walk and many more promises to keep. So all the very best.
Thank you. And I think one of the major reasons that why this is getting attention is a book of which you are one of the editor, State of Bail Jurisprudence in India, published by LexisNexis. And I think that's a wonderful work. And you mentioned about awareness of judges, students, lawyers, etc. I think academic work of this sort can definitely contribute in the reform of bail. So can I now come to you, Anil sir? For you, what are 2 points? What are 2 reforms which can be introduced in bail laws?
Maximum remand period has to be fixed by law. So though there is provision under 167, it has been circumvented by adding provisions under UAP and other special laws where bail is not at all given. So that has to be avoided. Even in all cases, invariably in all cases, there must be a maximum period of remand. Beyond that, if remand is to be secured, there must be reasons. Now, after the amendment, there is a practice that if bail is to be granted, the court has to record reasons.
Right. So
it should be the other way. If remand is to be extended beyond certain period, fixed period, court has to give reasons for that. Right. So that is the major suggestion I have. Right. Another is securing. See, the reason what makes is the person fleeing the justice. It is not. It's a myth. Because in the modern age, there are effective measures to secure the presence of the person. Right. See, the conditions can be imposed by court, which will be sufficient to see that person's presence is ensured. So these are 2 things which I would like to.
There can be apps like Arogya Setu app, which can track the movement.
Yeah, of course.
Violation of privacy. That means violation of privacy.
So that was on the lighter note. So finally, I come back to Sarfaraz. So what are your views on?
Let me say first the case which I forget. Rajdev Sharma case, Rajdev Sharma 1, Rajdev Sharma 2. The court fixed the time limit for conducting the trial, and it was overruled by P. Ramachandra Rao case. When I said reform, one of the things which definitely should be, we have to reform our system of trial. So it must be some mechanism by which we can, within the particular limit, the trial will be conducted. Two, as Anil said, I do agree with that. There must be, if the bail is refused, the reason has to be given by the court. My experience is again from the field, my early days as a practicing lawyer. The culture of bail is distinct from place to place. So those who are in audience from Bihar, Jharkhand, and from Bengal, in courts in the Bengal, by and large, they are more liberal. And you see the courts in Bihar, they are not liberal. You can just see starting of 498 cases. The average period time taken for getting bail in 498 in Bengal and 498 in Bihar, or similar in any cases. So again, it's not the uniform throughout the country. We must have a general guideline that when bail is refused, what will be the criteria? Because ultimately refusal can only be on the ground that if it is adversely impacting the investigation or trial, and then we can apply the test, report test, as well as the gravity of the offenses. But it is no risk. It should not be a thing. And then putting into place some kinds of obligations on the state machinery. For example, the common practice. If suppose they are not able to submit the charge sheet, they know that they cannot submit charge sheet within a particular 90 days time. After 50 or 60 days time, they will add some other legislation, UAPA, to make the longer period of time. Is it required or not? Suppose tomorrow in those cases, if they get acquittals, what the state going to take action in his name? What we have a accountability system put in place for any those kinds of either false prosecution, wrong prosecution, or wrong use of sections, just to keep the person in behind the bar for a particular period of time. The things can improve, because we don't have, we completely, this non-accountable systems are there. Whether you name the agency, even the police, there is some accountability because it's a hierarchy. The prosecuting agency, what accountability mechanisms are there? What role they play? The director of public prosecution, which has been mandated by the CRPC, how many places are being implemented? How much of the under the mandate, the district magistrate, etc., how the professionals can be controlled by the executives? Those are the issues are at the grassroots level, which accountability within all the functionaries. If it's placed, then only we can have a system where we able to improve the entire thing, including the bail jurisprudence, which is there. That's my vision. Definitely, we can look for that future will be much brighter, and we learn from our mistakes.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your enlightening comments again, and thank you all the panelists, because it's satisfying for me as a moderator that such a complex issue, we could discuss it in a very clear and layman language, and we could complete it well on time. So now I'll take few questions from the participants. So if any participant has any question, they may type in the chat box, and I will read out for you to the specific panelist. Please. So there is one question on a prima facie test, and how do we assess this prima facie test? Would anybody like to comment upon prima facie test to grant the bail?
Okay, anyone, like my only view is prima facie test is again by looking at the document which has been produced. Court develops some opinion about the cases, that it's a because when we say prima facie case, it's the gravity again. is the risk to release the accused person, or rather the need of the accused person that point of time for the investigation. So if there's a requirement, there's a need, but definitely they can give. For instance, if suppose it is a case of theft, where some property worth of 2 lakhs or 3 lakh rupees theft is committed, accused is arrested. Now, it's an important case where there's a requirement of recovery of the materials. Now, unless you give some opportunity to the investigating agencies to investigate, find out the truth about it and things, you cannot. But if suppose the investigating agency has keep the accused person for 1 week time, and after that 1 week time, the case diary shows they have not done nothing, and then they want another 7 days police custody. Now, that time the prima facie cases will be different. It does not look like a requirement of sending them to the custody in the case of after kidnapping, etc. Whether the girls recovery or the child recovery, etc. are important factors. So it depends on the case-to-case basis. The whole idea is that whether there is a need to keep the persons into custody, whether it will serve the purpose of investigation or serve the purpose of the trial.
So one question which has been asked by the panelist is, I'll reframe it in my language to make it a generalization. So there are concerns regarding COVID-19 in the prisons also. And earlier Supreme Court gave the direction in the beginning of the COVID that unnecessary under trial prisoners should be released. But now, as the time is passing, we are seeing still again the trend of putting them in detention has again started. So how do we assess this situation in light of COVID? Should we send them to jail or should we keep them outside? How do we draw the balance? If Professor Anil Variath would like to comment on it.
Mechanically sending them to jail is to be avoided. So if there is a severe case or which invariably requires a remand, then it can be. Otherwise, he has to be enlarged in bail or maybe asked to appear in a different ways. So as far as possible during the COVID period, remand is to be minimized, so not totally avoided, it's minimized.
Right. Another question, thank you, sir, for your comments. Another question which has been asked by the panelist is, if a poor person has been falsely implicated or wrongly present, how such person can be released on bail? Professor Shruti, would you like to comment on it? Poor people who are not able to hire an advocate. So it's more on legal aid.
Indigents.
Right.
So I think there again, the factors which must be taken into consideration are the background, the living conditions, the peculiar circumstances of the person, where the amount of the bail should be fixed accordingly. See, it is the entire gamut of factors which are to be, which play an important role. It is not only the kind of offense which has been committed, but it is also the peculiar. I think there was a question regarding Mr. Chidambaram also, and the fact that initially he was being denied. Now these are kind of economic offenses where the person in charge is a very prominent member of the political system. As opposed to this, if you look at the poor people, they do not, I mean, they are completely sidelined. Nobody is bothered about them. Nobody is concerned about what is happening to them. So the minimum that you can do is provide a kind of an amount of the bail which has to be allowed should be of an amount which is easy for them, because the objective of bail being to look after and protect the personal liberty of the person. And if all the other factors which are given are satisfied, which is that, see, we've already discussed, all of us have said that in today's time, there is no risk of flight. Now, if evidence has already been collected, if it has already been recorded, witnesses have been examined, again, there is no need left for the person to continue to be in jail. So these are many factors which should play the role of a significance when you take a decision of granting bail. Non-cooperation is again to be limited to whether the person is appearing when he is summoned or not. Is he doing what he is being asked to or not? So besides this, if the person is poor, it is our duty as the society to help him out of the situation rather than you misuse that inequality which is present.
Right. On the point of inequality and flight risk, one concern which generally comes is there are a lot of migrant workers, especially in city like Mumbai, who don't have residence, permanent residence in the city. They sleep on streets and then they are charged with offenses like NDPS, beggary, theft, etc. And generally court denies them bail, uh, not because these people definitely don't have passport, etc. But they don't have permanent residence, and there is no one who can give the surety also. So these are also some of the considerations which looms large, when the question of granting or denying bail comes before the trial court judge. How much that is appropriate can definitely be debated. So I'll ask now one last question, and because this person has asked this question at least 4 times, I was avoiding it because it was unclear. But if it's clear to any of the speaker, please answer it. Can an anticipatory bail be precarious sometimes? Yes, sir.
I don't know, but anticipatory bail, what does implies with or what he intend with the previous word? It can be now we have put in place a proper, much better check after the amendments, where the requirement of these information to the public prosecutors, even on need arises in the presence of the person to file the application. So there is a proper check which is there, and definitely we require anticipatory bail system in place. Because there are many occasions where we are apprehensive that persons may be unnecessarily being arrested, maybe some political cases or otherwise, and it's not uncommon in India. So in a situation where it's not uncommon having either false case or political cases or taking some kinds of vendetta against the others, where many things can be managed, anticipatory bail is definitely required with check, and that proper check is put in place.
Right. Thank you so much, sir. So I think with this, because it's already 12:40, it's time to close the session, and I would request Gauri to give the vote of thanks. Gauri, are you there?
Yeah. Unmute her. Unmute her.
Thank you, Chirag sir. My name is Gauri Rane. I'm a research associate at Maharashtra National Law University, Mumbai. Firstly, I would like to tell all the participants that the participation certificate will be emailed to you. On the filling of the form, we will be issuing the certificate. So on the successful completion of today's online panel discussion organized by Center for Research in Criminal Justice in collaboration with Lawlix Media Partners, I deem it as a great honor and privilege to propose vote of thanks on behalf of the team CRCJ. Firstly, I would like to thank all the panelists who have joined us here today. Professor Dr. Anil G. Varia sir, Professor Dr. Sarfaraz Ahmad Khan sir, Professor Shruti Bedi, providing participants on various dimensions related to today's topic, that is bail or jail, the dilemma continues. I'm extremely thankful to Professor Chirag Balyan sir, who actually came up with the idea of conducting online panel discussion on such crucial topic and moderating it at its best. Sir, I'm sure the participants have benefited from today's online discussion, and we have served the purpose behind conducting it. Professor Sajid Sheikh sir, we are extremely thankful for making sure that today's event runs smoothly by handling all the technicalities. Further, I'm extremely thankful to our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Dilip Uke, and Honorable Registrar Vivek Gavane sir, for encouraging and supporting the team of CRCJ in conducting online events. And lastly, I'm extremely thankful to all the participants who have joined us live in large numbers. Such participation and enthusiasm is extremely overwhelming, and we look forward to host you all in future with more such events. and we wish you all good luck for your future endeavor. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Gauri. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.